Morning. I think it's well, certainly the first time I've been here, so I'm not quite sure why they asked an old oil and gas guy to talk to an audience like this on innovation. But hopefully you'll see some of the reason why. Firstly, I work at Calera, and huge vision and a great opportunity, huge opportunity, taking CO2 and making cement out of it. So we actually can do this, and the issues for us are, can we do it at scale, and can we do it economically and reproducibly? So those are some of those challenges. So the whole idea is to have a huge solution for CO2. So we have a pretty successful platform. We can make cement, and we can do it reliably. And we've got a very clever way of making, using electrochemistry in a novel fashion to create base to be able to assist the absorption. It's an aqueous absorption system. We're trying to move that platform out to grow that technology to make it more applicable to more space. But there's a belief within the company, there's a whole bunch of different things we can do, which are entirely different than the staff currently hired with the expertise we've got. So we're trying to look outside the existing expertise using an expertise base that is comfortable in their own space. That presents quite a challenge. So moving on to the process, this I don't want to take too long on. Anyone who's had anything to do with GE or major companies will recognize this process. Putting ideas in a hopper, going through internal systems to check them out. The last bit's a little different. We're going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing internally. And yesterday, one of the presenters, Scott, said from Intuit, they're doing exactly the same thing. But then the next bit, we're looking outside the company in a fairly clever way via the internet, which is presenting us a much, much larger set of people to look at the problem. So then you have this large machine that large companies like, but we're really quite a small company. So what we're trying to do is lever the internal expertise in a pretty clever way to look at the problem in a completely different way and also use external innovation techniques to do that. So the internal, we've got some really talented people. They've been picked because they're really talented, but they're really talented in specific areas. We're trying to ask them to look outside those areas, so how do you best do that? And in addition to that, we're putting alongside that some external techniques to be able to widen that opportunity set out to look at those solutions. So firstly, this is almost exactly what Scott was talking about, what they did in Intuit. Built a web-based system ourselves, called it Blue Planet Lounge. Everybody has access. Everybody has an ability to look at everybody else's problems and see everything that's put on there. That's working. We've got a company now of around 80 or 90 people. There's 70 people who've used it, but really there's around 30 people who regularly use it. So we're quite happy with it. We've got some pretty good ideas. And of course, the beauty of this is one person can have an idea on, let's say, alkalinity, the other one on a product, and then someone else looks at it and says, no, the real value of that is putting it together. And we've got a couple of examples of that going forward now. And that's really working pretty well. We would like to get more engagement for all of the company, but getting 35 out of 80 people really isn't too bad to start with. By the way, I've been in the company about 6 months. This initiative is probably around 4 months old. In addition to that, we're looking at using the internet-based search mechanisms with 2 companies. Gen3 is the company that are all about problem formulation. They come in and spend a long time defining what your challenges are. They do it with your staff. And then they have a network that they then put that problem out to. This company's based in Boston, and they have a huge linkage to Russia and around 2,500 registered solvers looking at problems. We're just starting that process there. We've met with them once, and they're in for 2 days starting tomorrow and Thursday in the company. The other one we're a little further down the track on is Incentive, and I was chatting to a few people this morning, and they've looked at using this. Whereby you define the problem with them and they put it up on their internet. They have a link to Nature as well. And that process is ongoing. So Gen 3, I've really already told you this slide, so I've got a bit ahead of myself. This one is a little more expensive than the other route, and there's an upfront expenditure, whereas Incentive is really all based about success. You define with the incentive group what sort of prizes you'll give if you end up with success as defined by the criteria you start with. And that's the incentive approach. We've been running this now in incentive around 12 weeks, and we've got the first set of challenges back. And we have, I believe, 250 solvers registered who have given over any IP to us for anything they find if we end up giving them the prize. So that's a pretty interesting way of levering a very small company with a limited scientific staff. Now, the issue will be what the quality of those results are, and also how quickly we can get through evaluating them. And here are the 3 challenges. They're pretty big challenges for the company. You know, novel ways to make bicarb, novel ways of converting the carbonic acid from an aqueous process into carbonate. And then one of our big challenges is the process we use to make base makes an acid. So it's how do you use that acid, which is unfortunately in a dilute and dirty state. And that one is receiving the most attention, and we are pretty optimistic about some of the work that's going on in that space from these searchers. So really, it's all about a very small company leveraging the expertise internally to look at the problem in a different way, both internally and externally. And that summarizes what we're doing. And I'm very happy to say I'm 1.5 minutes under time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's see. Nope. Nope. Sorry, is this still yours?
Oh, yeah, just rush through some backup in case we got some questions. I'm not quite sure how that's working in there.
I think somebody's, if I got this figured out. Well, I could just start talking. Open to suggestions here. So I'm Steve Crane from Lightsail Energy, and we're developing grid-scale energy storage systems there we go, that use compressed air as the storage medium. And effectively what we make is a very large, very efficient air compressor. That sort of Jules Vernish-looking machine up there is kind of a first product. And although it looks kind of Victorian, the technology really requires a lot of innovation. And as I'm sure everybody in this audience doesn't need to hear from me, that the more innovative your technology is, the more iterations it's going to take to get it right. And we recognize that right from the beginning. And Vinod recognized it as well. And I remember about a year or so ago, we were in a status meeting with him, and he said almost casually, what you guys should do is figure out how to iterate 10 times faster. And we nodded politely and wrote that down. But it did start working on me, and I started thinking about, well, so what is the problem? Why is iterative development normally slow? And I think the big answer is that you design something, you build it, you test it, you look at the results, you think about the results, and you use your conclusions from that process to inform the next design and so forth. And so it's an extremely serial process. It's very rational. It's fairly efficient, but it's very slow. So we asked ourselves, what can we do to really speed it up? And so 2 ideas. The first one is exactly what Tim Brown said yesterday, which is you want to actually engineer the development process itself. So you want to think about how you actually do this development. And what he didn't say, at least not explicitly, is that you're not going to get the process right the first time. That there's sort of a meta iteration required where you really need to look at how it worked and where your pipeline stalled and where you went off into the weeds, and then refine the process until you can basically build a pipeline that runs really smoothly. And the pipeline is the second idea, that you want to develop in parallel. You want to parallelize as much as possible, which is not always that logical. Because if you think about it, so for example, for our valve designs, We are currently testing our first generation. Our second generation is being assembled and going through unit test. The third generation now is going through simulation, CFD simulation, and the fourth generation just came off the design table, which means we actually haven't even gotten the results from testing our first one before we've designed our fourth generation. Is that going to be wasteful? Maybe, but the point is, if it isn't, and usually it isn't, usually you have a pretty good idea of what you need to do next and next and next. Those things are coming out of the pipeline every couple of weeks instead of every few months. So we stole a lot of ideas, as you probably guessed, from the people who, the sort of classic CPU cache theory. That first off, analogously with having the memory right next to the processor so that it's accessible very quickly, you want to be able to do as much as possible of your iteration process in-house and not contract it out. You want to look ahead, you want to guess what subsequent iterations are going to need and get stuff ready for those. All right, so that's fairly abstract. Let me take you very quickly through a case study here. So one thing we need to do is to design water spray systems. So we spray water into our compression chamber. It absorbs a lot of the heat, makes the process much more efficient. We're a bunch of physicists. We've never designed spray nozzles or anything remotely like it in our lives. So we asked one of our advisors, and he sent us off to a very highly regarded consulting firm that shall remain nameless. They spent about 6 weeks, came back with a design for a spray system, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And it just didn't make any sense. What their design could not be built. And we said, oh no, we're gonna have to wait another 6 weeks to get to get a new version. So we decided we needed to iterate in days instead of weeks, and so we decided to bring it all in house. We looked at what's involved in each step. So design, simulation, fabrication, unit test. In other words, test just the nozzles without the whole system, and then ultimately, if that works and they match up with the simulation, then you put it in the full system. First thing we did is we looked at each of those steps, found out where the bottlenecks were. Some of the steps were a lot longer than others. We tried to make every step the same length of time, no more than 2 days, and that way the pipeline could run very smoothly. So starting with the design, we made a lot of different spray nozzles. That's our rogues gallery of early designs in the upper picture. One thing we realized pretty quickly is you had to engineer the thing that holds those things, as they're all different sizes and shapes, and that was very inefficient. So we started making consistent size, a standardized package that they go into, and then I mentioned about refining the iterative process. The final thing here you see on the your right, I guess, is a carrier that the nozzles screw into, so that it's extremely fast to try new ones rather than having to pull the whole thing in and out. Simulation actually ended up being the bottleneck. It actually took longer to simulate the behavior of a nozzle than to build another one and test it out. But we really there was a lot of value in the simulation too. So we bought a lot of high-end computing resources, were able to do 10 simulations simultaneously, and that then sort of brought everything in line with everything else. The real key, though, being able to fabricate these things in-house. Really no substitute for a computer numeric control mill if you're making stuff like this. This way we can make 50 variants that very methodically went through a large parameter space. We can make multiples. We could have extras ready to go in later. We also built a lab just to test nozzles. It was very expensive, but it was designed specifically for very high throughput operation and could not possibly have gotten as far as we did without it. And then finally, in-system testing mostly involved coming up with clever ways of cycling everything through that. You're looking right down into our compression cylinder there at all the nozzles finally installed and operating. So in terms of the results, we did create a pipeline that could operate very smoothly when it needed to. It could produce a new design every 2 days instead of every 6 weeks. And the consultant I mentioned earlier, their original design had 720 nozzles with a pressure behind them of 1,000 psi. And what we're running now, and by the way, we're not done yet, is 32 nozzles at 200 psi. So that's a 100x improvement to the design, which we did in under 4 months. So I think that shows you the value of really thinking about how you go about doing this. And so we threw out a lot of nozzles and so forth, but ultimately, we saved the organization's time. We saved elapsed time overall by quite a bit, and that's really our highest value resource.
Great.
Okay, let's see if the presentation is up here. There we go. Okay, so I'm Jagdeep Singh. I'm founder and CEO of a very early stage science project that's in the energy storage space. The risk is extremely high. In fact, we had a board meeting last week. One of our investors, besides Vinod, is KP, and they told us that we are the highest risk project in their portfolio. Hopefully the highest return as well, but highest risk. And so risk is something that we've been thinking a lot about. And this is my fourth startup now with Vinod, and Vinod encourages us to think a lot about risk. So I think a lot of this is techniques that I've used in the past to manage risk that have actually worked out really well in terms of outcome. So just want to share with you kind of the way that we've dealt with risk in the past. So the basic goal, of course, is the idea is to try and build an entire execution plan around managing risk. And the reason is essentially value creation at a startup level is really synonymous with systematic risk reduction. And in the end, the job of the CEO can be thought of as the chief risk manager. Your job really is to think about everything that can go wrong and make sure that you've adequately addressed all those possibilities and are knocking them off one by one. So the basic process, pretty straightforward. Obviously, you obviously have a business goal you're trying to accomplish, and based on that goal, you want to first start by identifying all the key risks and prioritizing all the key risks. And this involves sitting down with your core management team, the core technical team, thinking through every single thing that can go wrong, and basically listing all those risks out. Step two is identify what it takes to eliminate those risks. So for every single risk, are there some experiments? Are there some models? What do you need to know or do in order to take that risk off the list? Step three then, once you have that list, is literally to build your execution plan by literally taking that list of risk mitigation steps and putting it on a schedule with deliverables and timelines and so on. And step four is obviously use that plan as your execution sort of blueprint and execute to what you've laid out there. So just a little more detail on each of these steps. In terms of identifying the risks, the key questions, of course, are related to what are the key unknowns that could result in failure. Failure being defined as not meeting your goal. The goal could be in the near term a technical result, longer term business goal, margin goal, revenue goal, and so on. But in the end, risk obviously comes in all flavors: technical, marketing, financing, and so on. You want to prioritize and rank order these risks. So you don't want to randomly attack the risk, but you clearly want to focus on the biggest things that can go wrong up front. And I think Vinod mentioned this yesterday as well, but if you fail, you want to fail early. There's a lot less damage done by failing early than by failing in 2 or 3 or 4 years after you've spent tens of millions of dollars and wasted a lot of your time and your people's time and so on. And then you want to try and put some level of quantification of each risk. This is obviously subjective, but you want your team to brainstorm and say, if we accomplished elimination of risk number 2, for example, how much would we reduce the overall risk ahead of us? Would it go from 100% to 80%? Would it go down to 50% and so on? And just thinking through this, it's obviously going to be subjective, but thinking through it helps you, as a team, agree on what you think the most important risks are. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, focus on the biggest risks first, because that's really a way to minimize wasted time. So this is just one example of how you would put all these risks together. There's different categories of risk. For example, in our case, there's conceptual risk. What if the whole concept is flawed? There's fabrication risk. What if you can't make a sufficient level of uniformity or control and so on in order to hit the numbers that you have? There's market risks. There's competitive risk, customer risk, and so on. And you want to literally go through all the risks, identify what the category is, the issue is, and then try and get some sense of the level. How important is this risk, i.e., how serious are the consequences of this risk materializing, and what's the probability of that risk materializing? And use that to we use a simple red, yellow, green kind of methodology. But in the end, it combines the magnitude of the risk with the probability of the risk, basically. Step 2 then is identifying the steps to mitigate these risks. What do you need to know to take that risk off the chart? Are there some experiments you can do? Are there some models? Are there some deals? Do you need some IP from some supplier? Is there some customer validation that you need in order to eliminate the risk? A lot of other things you could do to eliminate the risks. Identify each of those steps. These steps then are going to become the basis for your plan. So you lay out each step, you define what the mitigation levels are, and do that for all the risks on the chart. And then you basically build your plan around that list. Once you have that list of risk mitigation steps, that effectively is the input to your schedule. You literally go out and you say, when can we accomplish this step? Who do we need to accomplish this step? What do we need to have capital? How can we minimize the burn rate? And then you put it all together into a chart. This is an actual chart that we use, and I don't want to go into too much detail here, but suffice to say that you got all the risks basically line up to specific decision points and risk reductions. And then you can literally plot risk reduction against cash burn. And you obviously want to make sure that the risk reduction chart curve and the cash burn curve are sort of inverses. So in our case, risk reduction drops along a certain axis based on certain results, and the cash burn goes up. And to some extent, you want to make those things inversely proportional. You can't always control it, though. My last company, for example, used a chart like this. Let's see if I fast forward here. Seems to be stuck on this chart. The folks in the control room can forward one slide. That would be. Oops, there we go. Yeah, so this is a chart that we actually use in my last company, Infinera. And what you can see here is that, and this burn rate here is in millions. So what you can see is the risk isn't coming down very much for the first several months. It's still very close to 100%, over 80% certainly. But the burn rate is $2.5 million a month. So there's some cases in which basically in our case we couldn't do a lot of risk reduction until we built the fab and produced real parts. So there was a certain burn associated with that. So but at least that those are the few months in which you kind of in the white knuckle period, if you will. Unfortunately, we were able to pull this off, and the company went public and so on. But you ideally want to keep your cash burn, push the cash burn out relative to the risk reduction curve. And then step 4, of course, is you want to execute. Execution involves delivering on the milestones that you have on that chart, and then updating the risk matrix. The risks will clearly change as you knock off those risks. You're going to basically change the risk matrix in the schedule. You want to keep that up to date. And as risk is reduced, value is going to be created. I mean, when you go to your next round of financing, for example, you're going to be able to say, we had the following risks that we were worried about when we did the first round or the second round, and these risks are now out of the way, so we believe the company's worth more. And that makes sense. People, I think, generally understand that. And independently of that, it's just a very useful way to keep the team focused on what really matters, and not stuff that's sort of peripheral. There's a lot of things you need to do before you ship product at the end of the day, but some of them are mission critical and it can kill you now, and some of them are sort of would be nice. This way you can kind of keep the team really focused on what really matters. And with that, I think I'm also on schedule, and I'll turn it back to Samir.